And we begin this hour focused on accountability. Donald Trump is scheduled to be sentenced on 34 counts of falsifying business records ahead of his inauguration. And Judge Juan Merchan made clear yesterday that the timing of this sentencing is all Trump's doing. Quote, "The record is clear that defendant not only consented to, but in fact requested the very adjournment that led us down the path we are on. Any claim defendant may have that the circumstances have changed as a result of defendant's victory in the presidential election, while convenient, is disingenuous. The decision to uphold Trump's conviction and schedule the sentencing for January 10th almost certainly means Trump will be the first felon to serve as president of the United States. Now, if the sentencing goes forward as planned, it will come on the same week as the anniversary of the January 6th attack on the Capitol, where, yet again, Donald Trump has all but escaped accountability for his role in attempting to overturn a free and fair election. Now, this week, President Biden honored Benny Thompson and Liz Cheney with the Presidential Citizens Medal for their work on the January 6th Select Committee. Joining us now, former senior advisor to the January 6th Select Committee and former Virginia Congressman Denver Riggleman. He's the author of The Breach, the untold story of the investigation into January 6th. Also with us, former Capitol Police Officer Harry Dunn.
Thank you both for being with us today. Congressman, I guess what is happening in the world? There is a sense that people, we can, I don't want people to get desensitized by everything that is happening here. Michael was absolutely correct. Donald Trump is going to be sentenced. Now, nothing going to happen to him. Let's just be very clear. Judge Juan Merchan has been very clear that the sentencing is to uphold the rule of law, and he's still he's been convicted by a jury, and he won't do any jail time. He likely won't have any fines, but he was convicted. And then a little over a week later, he's going to go on and assume the office of the presidency. Put a finer point on it for us.
Somebody used the word gobsmacked, which I think is the best word to use when you're talking about a felon being elected to presidency of the United States. And looking at Harry, it's good to see you, Harry. Great to see you here. Buddy. I think it's also an incredible slap to the face of everybody who protected the Capitol that day. And knowing I was coming on with Harry, I thought about January 6th specifically in the phone call that I actually got from Liz Cheney after January 6th happened. I'd only been out of Congress for 3 days. And, during that second impeachment, I was asked for a preliminary report on the individuals we saw on social media that had actually attacked the Capitol. And what we saw in there, we had 7 white nationalist groups there, and we already saw organization between those groups and their actual host and some of the places they were on, whether it was the Donald.win or 4chan or some of their other encrypted chats or Facebook, right, things like that. So that was 3 days afterwards I delivered a report to Liz Cheney. This is well before the January 6th committee. And when I look at the data that I saw there, the fact that we already saw QAnon types of things being retweeted by President Trump, the president-elect, as early as May as 2020, the fact he's still coming out with QAnon pins, the fact that he's a convicted felon, the fact that he's an adjudicated sexual abuser, all that stuff is gobsmacking to anybody who is on the rational and sane side. The issue we have, though, is that he won the popular vote. And I think that's the thing I'm trying to get my arms around. What happens next? Where do we go from here? And how, did another party how were they not able to take the vote? It is absolutely incredible. And I don't know if it's a testament to the disinformation, the new media alternate channels out there, or it's the fact that we only have 2 parties and there's this rot that's happening in this very dynamic society. I don't know how to get my arms around that with the data that I saw in the January 6th committee.
With the data and also with the consequences of what we saw on January 6th, you had Congressman Raskin talking about what this all means. Take a listen.
This is perhaps the most well-documented crime in American history, certainly the most well-documented crime against a group of police officers. We had 140 officers who were wounded with traumatic brain injuries and who got strokes, heart attacks, broken shoulders, necks, ribs, jaws, nose, skulls, you name it, all of it. So I think that we have got to bear down and make sure that people are studying each of these cases. And Donald Trump has got to take full responsibility and accountability for whatever happens with each of these people.
So for a little bit more context, the congressman there is talking about potential pardons for some of the folks who participated in January 6th. What message does it send to someone like you if all of a sudden he's pardoning all these people?
Well, we knew that it was coming. I mean, he ran his campaign on pardoning, so it kind of softens the blow. The only, I guess, in this day and age, we're searching for moral victories. The only moral victory is that pardon doesn't erase a guilty verdict, or these individuals, they pled guilty. A jury of their peers found them guilty, so they'll have to live with that always. The people, the jury of their peers got it right. But if you look at all the people that are sitting in jail, the people that went to jail, those people weren't sitting in jail for months and years for trespassing. They went to jail for assaulting police officers, the broken bones, the limbs. They had the opportunity to just bypass all the officers and just go in the Capitol. They had us outnumbered that many. But if you look at all the footage, if Michael Fanone comes to mind, Michael Fanone was on the ground. They didn't bypass Michael Fanone once he was down. They went back and kept kicking him while he was down. It wasn't just as simple as you were in our way, now we got past you, now we moved by you. They were there with the intent to harm and hurt people, whoever got in their way. And fortunately for the police officers that were there that day, the men and women of the Capitol Police, the Metropolitan Police, no members of Congress were hurt, no staff was hurt, whether it was an independent, a Republican, a Democrat, a MAGA supporter, it didn't matter. They all escaped harm that day because of the brave men and women of law enforcement.
And let's not forget, it was after that, those same Republican individuals that you protected would not agree to a resolution supporting the police officers and committing themselves by recognizing and awarding those officers the Congressional Gold Medal.
But wait, to that point, let's be clear. They did actually. When at the gold medal, there was a resolution that passed in Congress, the plaque that was supposed to go up, which Speaker Mike Johnson has failed to put up. It's already passed in law. It's signed into law under the last Congress, and Speaker Mike Johnson has refused to put that up. And that just shows to go more slap in the face to the officers that day.
And these are the same people who come out running around talking about, the blue.
Back the blue.
Back the blue. Yeah. Okay, so Denver, you've got the whiner in chief this morning at 7 a.m. Putting out tweets whining about the fact that there's never been a president who was so evilly and illegally treated as I. This sense of, oh, woe is me, as we look at what Judge Merchan is going to do coming up on the 10th, the inauguration. How do you see the beginning of this administration with the threat likely to happen of pardoning January 6ers, with the threat likely to happen of firing federal employees because, well, I don't know, they're federal employees. How do you see this starting out in just 2 weeks' time?
Well, Michael, it's good to see you, too. I think we got an indicator of Marjorie Taylor Greene telling a reporter, I think it was Matt Laszlo, I just saw it pop up on my feed, that she thought January 6th should be a national holiday of celebration. I think that's how you look at it. When I was listening to Harry, when you talk about the physical assaults on officers and somebody either joking around or saying January 6th should be a celebration, it's absolutely horrendous. And when you see a tweet, there's two Ds that come to mind, right? There's delusional and deranged, right? When you're looking at somebody who's tweeting those type of things. And I think when you're looking at the start, I think you look at legislation where you're going to see the chaos of yesterday, which people said, oh, first ballot for Mike Johnson. You guys know that wasn't that easy. And you know that there had to be a lot of arm twisting for people to vote for Mike Johnson for speaker. I think you're going to see chaos, because how do you run a government if so many people that are making policy believe in fantasies and disinformation? How do you run a government if you have somebody from the president-elect on down to a huge amount of congressional representatives who believe in the fantasy of stop the steal or other type of conspiracy theories and disinformation? And how do you trust anybody to make policy and law, as you were saying about the January 6th plaque, Harry, and also about some of the resolutions we have in Congress for law enforcement? How do you respect people who talk about back to blue or talk about real legislation who can't even acknowledge what happened on January 6th? I think that's the issue we have, and what I've been worried about is how do you make policy based on fantasy? And how do you have individuals who are afraid to actually face truth or be honest with constituents or themselves? How do you trust them to come up with any type of legislation or foreign policy or domestic policy that makes any sense? We should be concerned. And I guess I'm understating that a good bit, but I think that's what we're going to see at the beginning. And I think the indicators or what you see the congressional representatives saying about January 6th, I think is huge about the whole fabric of what's going to happen over the next 4 years.
Congressman, you going to run for governor?
Oh.
Ah, my gosh, that was my gosh. I mean,
I was told like 15 seconds.
Shocked me.
Let's turn that corner.
Well,
Man, that was fast. I tell you that I do have an exploratory committee about statewide office. You know, I have AI companies and I make whiskey too. I mean, I make whiskey and go after bad guys. That's my life.
That's the best kind of governor in my book.
Thank you so much, buddy. But, you know, I'm looking at independent. You know, I was talking about the corruption and rot and the two-party system. I know that makes people angry. I've had so many people say, my gosh, Denver, you got to do this. And so many people, especially who are invested, you know, in what we're doing right now, and sort of this corporate two-party structure that are coming off the top. We're like, how dare you? You can't run outside being a Democrat Republican. You're a traitor. So, you know, I have a lot of this happening right now, but I don't give a rat's. I'm going to do a real exploratory committee for statewide office because, you know, corruption's not just quid pro quo. Corruption's also really rot. And I think after what I've seen these last 4 years, why not? You know, maybe somebody needs to breach the wall. But again, it is a true exploratory committee because of my prior commitments. But thanks for that really incredible question right off the top rope. That really excites
There you
me.
go.
I
There
really
you go.
enjoy it.
Well, look, Harry
Harry
Harry was in the pool last cycle, so you know we'll probably get him back in the get him in the pool again.
I also have to say, why not is not a bad yard sign.